olam hasdo. Kili olam hasdo. Kili olam hasdo. Kili olam hasdo. Hashem kitov. Hodu Hashem kitov. Give thanks to God, for He is good. Kili olam hasdoi. His kindness is forever. Good evening, my holy sisters and brothers. Yasher koyach to you. May you be strengthened that here you are learning on the evening of a national holiday. It's Thanksgiving. That's not a Jewish holiday. But the sentiment is so beautiful that we should all give thanks together. What could be more Jewish, more holy, more pious, more generous, more praiseworthy, more beautiful than giving thanks to God for all the blessings in our lives? Let's light up the darkness. And who is with us as we're getting going, learning a beautiful shtickle Torah here on this Thanksgiving evening? Melissa wishing a happy Thanksgiving and greetings from Great Neck, New York. Stephen from Dover, Harold from Oregon, Jennifer from Massachusetts, Larry says Queens, New York in the house. Arnold is in the house from the north. Renee says Yom Hodu Sameach. Happy Thanksgiving. Indianapolis in the house. Roger with us from Philly. Chaim from Charlotte says we pray to Hashem 3 times a day. James with us from Indianapolis. Sharon says happy Motzei Thanksgiving from Lebanon, New Jersey. I am wearing my new Grateful Yid shirt in honor of Thanksgiving. An attitude of gratitude. Beautiful, beautiful. This is the Grateful Yid shirt. It's available in our store, shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. Nina will put the link in the comments. Paul with us saying shalom from Minneapolis and happy Thanksgiving. Wayne with us from the Olmsted Township in Ohio. And he says, I'm blessed because you're blessed. Beautiful. Our blessings fall from heaven upon us in unison, in harmony, all of us together. May we all be blessed together. Roger says, thank you, Hashem, for all your blessings. Yosef, happy Yom HaHodu, as Sal mentioned yesterday, from Lowell, Mass. Jesse from Philadelphia. Arnold from Northridge. Bill says shalom. Nancy from Southern Pines. Wayne says he's ready to light up the darkness. Beverly says shalom. Lucy's with us from Minnesota. Yelena from Bend, Oregon. Tom from New York City. Donna from Bahama. Susan with us from Buchanan, Michigan. Blake from Ohio. There's the link from Nina. Bradley from Bend, Oregon. Let me see. Oops, I didn't get that going there. Over on the YouTube side. We got Neil over there in Virginia, Marjorie in Virginia, and Lynn in Texas. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's learning, our daf, our shir, our class tonight is dedicated by Diane Yaris in memory of her husband, Henry Yaris, on his yahrzeit. So on the Jewish calendar, he passed from this world on this date. We're now, I guess, in 11 Kislev. And may Henry's memory always be for a blessing. We honor him tonight by dedicating our learning in his memory. And may our learning, give him a little bit of extra merit in the world of souls and lift him even a little bit higher and closer to the throne of glory. I thought it would be good, just as right at the top of our learning tonight, because it's Thanksgiving in America, let's just read I'll read to you Psalm 100. It's just the perfect psalm. It's a short psalm, only 5 verses, and what could be more appropriate? Psalm 100. A song for a Thanksgiving offering. Shout to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with joy. Come before him with praise. Know that the Lord is God. He made us, and we are his people and the flock of his pasture. Come into his gates with thanksgiving, into his courtyards with praise. Give thanks to him. Bless his name, for the Lord is good, his kindness is forever, and until generation after generation is his faith. When we say that, from generation to generation is his faith, dual meaning, right? From generation to generation, we have faith in Hashem that he created us with good in mind. He wants good for us. We believe in him. We want to serve him. We want to serve him by taking care of his creatures, etc. We have faith in him. And it also means that he has faith in us. He has given us the tools and abilities and opportunities that we need to grow in wisdom, to grow in goodness, to grow in morality, to grow in kindness. No matter what our initial status is in terms of all these attributes of ourselves, we can always grow and come a little bit better, we'll never get to perfection, but of course we can just get a little bit more, a little kinder every day, a little wiser every day, a little more experienced, a little more apt to do good and take care of God's creatures in this world. All right, let's get to our learning. A lot to cover. Where are we? We are on Daf Hey. That's page 5 here in Tractate Pesachim, the 4th volume of the Talmud. We're studying the laws of Passover. We're in chapter 1, still discussing the first Mishna. The first Mishna held that on the or of the 14th, on which the light of the 14th, which we've now defined is the evening of the 14th, right? So if Passover is on the 15th of the Hebrew month of Nissan, it begins on the night, right? The 15th, all Hebrew dates begin on the night before the day. So we have the Seder on the night of the 15th of Nissan. The night before that, the night of the 14th, we search our homes for chametz. That's leavened bread, right? Bread made with yeast, puffy bread. We are not allowed to eat that during the festival of matzos, Passover. So we know we search it out on the night of the 14th, but we don't remove it from our homes on the night of the 14th. We search it out, right? We get ready. Usually we've already done a clean out and we have removed almost all of it, or at least we've got just a little bit left, maybe somewhere in our kitchen where we know exactly where it is. We're searching the rest of the house so that there should be no leavening there. But we are actually permitted to eat chametz, leavened bread, on the morning of the 14th, right? So the night is when we search it out. The next morning, we can still eat bread basically until noon. And then at the beginning of the noon, at the beginning of the afternoon, we take all the chametz that's in our possession and we burn it, we get rid of it, we remove it. And then from that afternoon on, we don't eat either bread, either chametz, or matzah. We have other work to do to get ready for the Seder that night. All right, so we already know that we search for the chametz on the night of the 14th, and we know that it's going to be prohibited to eat it in the afternoon of the 14th, the next day in the afternoon. And I've just said to you, so at about noon is the hour when we remove it. Well, how do we know that? How do we know that we can eat chametz in the morning of the 14th, but not in the afternoon? And when is that deadline? When does that change happen and why? How do we derive these laws? How do the rabbis derive these laws? Rabbi Meir says we can eat chametz for the first 5 hours of the daylight of the 14th of Nissan, and then we burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour. Rabbi Yehuda says we can eat chametz for the first 4 hours of the day, and then the 5th hour, we don't eat it and we don't burn it. We just let it sit there. We leave it in abeyance, and then we burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour. So both of them agree that it is prohibited by Torah law from the 6th hour onward. From where do we derive this? Abaye says we have 2 Torah verses that actually seem to contradict each other. So if we look, we have Exodus, let me get in front of me, 12:19 and Exodus 12:15. So they're actually in reverse order of how they occur in the Torah. But Abaye mentions these two verses. The first one is 7 days leaven, chametz, shall not be found in your houses, indicating that throughout these 7 days it is prohibited to maintain leaven in one's house. And yet it is written in another verse, yet on the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. So if we're supposed to be removing the chametz from our houses, as it says here, on the first day, well, that would imply that at the beginning of the first day, there is chametz in our houses, and we remove it sometime during the first day. But we were just told that 7 days there shall not be chametz in your houses, which would seem to indicate that entire 7 days, 7 24-hour days, there may not be any chametz in our houses. So this is a contradiction. How are we going to resolve this contradiction? It must be that when the verse says, on the first day you shall remove the chametz from your houses, it doesn't mean the first of the 7 days of Passover. It must mean the first day when it is possible to remove the leaven, meaning like the pre-first day. In other words, the 14th of Nissan, right? The day before the first day. But the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. Maybe that's not what it means. Maybe the Torah meant that we remove the leaven on the night of the first day. And then we have 7 daylight periods with no leaven in our houses. So in other words, on the first night of Passover, when we're having the Seder in our houses, right, where we have the festive meal and we read the Haggadah, the retelling of the story of the Exodus from Egypt, maybe right before we have that dinner, that's the time to remove the leaven from our houses. And so, some of that night, there's leaven in our houses, but then it's gone that night. And then the next day, okay, it's gone. So we have 7 daylight periods where there's no chametz in our houses. But this can't be, because we eat matzah at the Seder, and the prohibition that we can't have leaven in our houses is juxtaposed to the prohibition, to the commandment that we eat matzah. In other words, we have two verses, Exodus 12:20 and 12:18. Exodus 12:20. You shall not eat anything that is leavened in all your dwellings. You shall eat matzah. That's Exodus 12:20. And it is written with regard to matzah on the first day, on the 14th. He's adding on the 14th day. But it says, in regard to matzah, in the evening you shall eat matzah. Right? In the evening you shall eat matzah. So since we know we eat matzah in the evening, on the first evening when we have our Seder, we eat matzah. And in the same verse that it says, you shall not eat anything that is leavened, in all your dwellings you shall eat matzah, it indicates, the sages read out from that verse, that if we're eating matzah, there cannot be any leaven in our houses. So at the time we're eating matzah, the leavening must have already been removed. And since we're eating matzah from the evening of the 15th of Nissan, right, we could eat the matzah right away as soon as Passover begins. There can't be any leaven, any chametz in our houses from when the holiday actually begins on the 15th. So we come back to the idea, no leavening can be in our houses for the complete 7 days of Passover. It had to have been removed before. Therefore, when it says remove it on the first day can't be referring to the first day of Passover. It must be referring to the day before the first day, the 14th of the Hebrew month of Nissan, rather than the 15th. Let me get back where I am. So in that case, so we know we're supposed to remove it on the 14th. Okay, we already established that we search for the chametz in our homes on the night of the 14th. Why not remove it first thing in the morning? We've already seen that it's a Jewish teaching that when you have an obligation to fulfill, you should get up in the morning and do it first thing. Why don't we remove the leavening and stop eating it as soon as it's daylight on the 14th. And so the sages learn out from Exodus 12:15. The verse said again, "Yet on the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses." This word, yet, at the beginning of the verse in Hebrew, ach, is a term that the rabbis understand wherever it occurs in the Bible, it is a term of restriction. Meaning, on the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. Not, it's already removed at the very first instance of that day. Rather, it means part of the day there will be leaven in your houses, and part of the day there will not be leaven in your houses. Now, you can say we did that search the night before. We didn't remove it then. So there was leaven in our houses during that whole night. And then if we remove it first thing in the morning, okay, so that would be fulfilled. The ach would be fulfilled, right? There was leavening from night when the 14th of Nissan began. It was in our houses the whole night, and then we removed it in the morning. But the sages don't see it that way. They're going to say this ach, in fact, is going to refer to part of the daylight of the 14th. There's leaven in our houses, and part of the daylight there is not. How are they going to get that? We're not there yet. But first, we have a problem. We have a problem because if we look at the laws in the Torah regarding Sukkot, the fall festival, this festival of tabernacles, right? When we build a sukkah outside our homes and we take all our meals there and we even sleep there if possible. And we live in huts. We dwell in these booths that we build outside because we dwelled in such booths when the children of Israel were wandering in the desert, and we commemorate that. So with regard to the laws of Sukkot, it says, on the first day you shall take, where is it? And it says, and you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of a beautiful tree, that's the esrog, the branches of palm trees, that's the lulav. I have my lulav still over there from Sukkot. And the boughs of thick trees, that's the myrtle, the hadass, and then the willows of the brook, right? The aravah. So the four species, that's the esrog, the palm, the myrtle, and the willow. And those are the four species we hold together in our hand, and we say certain blessings, and we sing Hallel, and we wave them in the 6 cardinal directions, east, south, northwest, up and down. But we know, we've been doing this for thousands of years, that on Sukkot, when it says we do that on the first day, it means on the first day of Sukkot, during the festival, not before the festival. So if on the first day of the festival, with regard to Sukkot, means that we wave our 4 species on the first day itself, why, when it says on the first day of Passover, you shall remove the leaven from your houses, why there does it mean the day before the first day, where on Sukkot the first day meant on the first day, right? It's a contradiction. Now we need to resolve this contradiction. So the Gemara says, well, there it is different. Because immediately in the same verse, it says, where is it? There it is different because it says, and you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of the beautiful tree, branches of palm trees, and boughs of thick trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. Right? It says, so you shall do this on the first day, and you shall rejoice 7 days. And how do we rejoice? One of the forms of rejoicing on Sukkot is waving the 4 species. So because that's in the very same verse, so now we understand, okay, it has a different meaning. When it says take it up on the first, take the 4 species and wave them on the first day of Sukkot, it means on the first day. But where it says remove the leaven from your houses on the first day of Passover, it actually means the day before the first day. It has to, It has to, because it's just, logically speaking, it can't mean that we do it on the first day, since on the first day, we're already eating matzah and we're in this state of elevated purity, and the leavening has to have been removed already so that it's not associated with us and in our possession during the holiday itself. So, to get there, Rava says, the way we get there is not so much the laws of when it says remove the leavening and on the first day, and you shall observe the festival of matzah for 7 days, because that would seem to be that contradiction with Sukkot. Rather, says Rava, where we're going to get the laws of removing the leavening even on the 14th is from the laws of the festival of the Pesach, meaning the festival of the Paschal offering, right? Because there's two main things that we do at Passover. There's three main things that we do. One is we retell the story. We recount the Exodus from Egypt. We're not talking about that yet. But like the main two things that we do is that we, get all this leavening out and replace it with matzah. So that's the festival of matzahs. But the other thing is when the temple is standing, we bring the Paschal offering. We're no longer able to do that. But when the temple is standing, so people, all the Jews for whom it was possible to get themselves to Jerusalem, would make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem in the springtime. They would bring a lamb or a kid, a young goat, with them, or purchase it on the way. They would register in families and groups to do that. And then on the afternoon of the 14th, they would slaughter the Paschal lamb or the Paschal kid. They would slaughter it, pour some of its blood on the altar in the temple, and then they would roast it and eat it that night. And it's over that meal they would eat the offering, right, the meat of the lamb or of the kid, with bitter herbs to remember the bitterness of slavery in Egypt, and matzah, right? So we have that meal together, and over that meal is where we recount how God saved us from slavery in Egypt, the telling of the story. But the point is, it's inherent to this festival that we're going to slaughter that animal on the afternoon of the 14th. Where is that taught? That's Exodus 34:25. So Rava says this is where we derive everything from, because it says in Exodus 34:25, you shall not slaughter the blood of my offering over leavened bread. You shall not slaughter the blood of my offering over leavened bread. Neither shall the offering of the feast of the Passover be left to the morning. We have to eat it that night, and then what's left over gets burned. We don't have leftovers and continue eating the Paschal offering the next day, right? So, in other words, all leaven must be removed before the time that the Paschal lamb may be slaughtered. When is it slaughtered? In the afternoon on the 14th. So all the leavening has to be removed before the lamb is slaughtered. Since the lamb is slaughtered in the afternoon of the 14th of Nissan, the removal of leavening is by noontime on the 14th. Then the Gemara asks, well, wait a minute. How do we know it's noon for everybody? I mean, there's going to be a lot of lambs and kids slaughtered on the afternoon of the 14th. They can't all be done at once. There's just not that much room in the temple. So maybe what it means is that when you and your group get to have your lamb slaughtered and its blood offered on the altar, until then you can eat chametz, and after that you can't. So you have to remove your leavening right at the time that you're going to go slaughter your lamb. But maybe for some people it's going to be 1 p.m. and for some it's 1:30 and for some it's 2 and 2:30. Why isn't it just whenever you get to slaughter your lamb, that's when you have to stop eating chametz? Why are we going to say that there's a universal deadline it's going to be the same hour in the day for all the Jewish people? That's what the Gemara is asking. So Rabbi Akiva is basically going to answer the question. There's going to be some more discussion about it, but Rabbi Akiva is going to answer the question, and he's going to look to Exodus 12:17. Hold on a second. Yeah, Exodus 12:17. Rabbi Akiva says, he looks to this verse. It says, "Yet on the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses." We read that already. And so that's where we get that it's going to be part of the day we can eat chametz and part of the day we can't. And, says Rabbi Akiva, look at the verse 12, Exodus 12:17. "And on the first day there shall be to you a sacred convocation, and on the seventh day a sacred convocation. You shall perform no manner of work on them." Now, this is the Torah telling us that the first day of Passover and the seventh day of Passover are a festival where no work can be done, just like Shabbos. As we've seen, festivals are the same as Shabbos with respect to the fact that we can't do the 39 prohibited labors, except there's one difference. You can cook on a festival. On Shabbos, you can't cook. On a festival, you can. Since you're permitted to cook on a festival, you can kindle a flame to do the cooking with. But Rabbi Akiva is going to learn out from this juxtaposition of that we remove the leavening and we slaughter the Paschal lamb and we do it partway through the day. And he's going to say, okay, we're going to kindle a flame to cook the meat. That's going to happen on the night of the 15th. Even though we can do no work, we can cook the meat that night. But we cannot kindle a flame that's not for cooking. What's a flame that we need with connection to Passover, but that's not for cooking? The flame in which we burn the chametz. And from Rabbi Akiva's teaching, we're going to learn out three things. We're going to learn three lessons, says the Gemara, from what Rabbi Akiva is teaching us here. Number one, that the removal of bread, when we get rid of the chametz, it's not like we just throw it in trash cans and put it in a dumpster. We have to burn it, right? So when we're removing it, we're burning it. Number two, he says that it's a kind of a technicality about the difference between festivals and Shabbos, that we learn from it that the prohibition against kindling a fire on Shabbat was specifically singled out in the Torah to divide the various primary categories of labor and to establish liability for performance of each of them. Right, so it's a technical thing, but we're going to learn out that if you do various kinds of prohibited labor on Shabbos or on a festival, you're going to be liable to bring a sin offering for each of those categories, but not for subcategories. We're not going to go there right now. But the third lesson is, and learn from it also, since it is permitted to kindle a fire for the purpose of preparing food on a festival, it is not permitted for a purpose that is not preparing food, meaning burning the chametz. We must burn the chametz. We cannot burn the chametz on Passover because the festival has already begun and that day is a sacred convocation. So the burning of the chametz has to happen on the 14th. This is a further proof of that. As Rava taught, it has to happen before we slaughter the lamb or the kid, which happens in the afternoon of the 14th. Okay? So now, and how do we know that it's one deadline for everybody? It's a sacred convocation, right? It's for everybody. It's a holiday for everybody, and everyone is charged in the same law. And says the Gemara, the merciful one states the time of the slaughter of the Paschal lamb, which begins at the end of the 6th hour. And this verse is referring to a particular point in time rather than when each individual gets around to it. So the chametz has to be burned by the time that it is appropriate to slaughter the Paschal lamb. The chametz gets burned at the end of the morning on the 14th, and from the afternoon on, we're slaughtering the lambs. It's just not everybody can do it at the same time. In the modern, for the last 2,000 years, we don't have the lamb because we can't bring a Paschal offering because the temple was destroyed. But we study this law, and when the third temple is rebuilt, we'll be able to have the Paschal lamb or kid on Passover. I'm almost at the end, so if you have questions or comments, put them in there now. Nina will pass them to me, and I'll get to those questions and comments. Okay, the Gemara next is going to examine how far do we have to go in removing all chametz, all leaven, from our community. So Exodus 12:19 says, 7 days leaven shall not be found in your houses. Well, to what purpose does the verse state this prohibition? Wasn't it already stated at Exodus 13:7, and no leaven shall be seen with you, neither shall there be leavened bread seen with you in all your borders. So how far do we have to go? I mean, when we're living in the Holy Land, does this mean that when Passover comes, we have to eradicate all chametz from the entire nation? Like there cannot be any bread in the entire Holy Land of Israel? Remember that even in ancient times, in the kingdom of Israel, there were many non-Jews who lived in the kingdom of Israel, and they are not obligated to eat matzah or to remove leaven from their homes. So are we going to impose on them that they have to remove chametz from their houses, even though they're not obligated, because we're obligated and it says no leavening shall be seen within our borders? And the answer is no. Now, this discussion is going to get pretty involved. It's beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about tonight. But where the discussion ends up, we're asking questions, do the Gentiles have to remove the chametz from their homes? No, they do not. What if a Gentile is storing some of his chametz on your property, right? Like maybe you have a big storage shed, right? And you're storing stuff in there, not just for yourself, but for other people too. Maybe you own a warehouse and a lot of people are keeping stuff there. So it's your warehouse. You can't have chametz on your property, but what if it's not your chametz? It belongs to someone else. They're going to go back and forth on that quite a bit. Where the discussion finally ends up is we have to get rid of all chametz from our possession. And possession in this case, what it means is both what we own and what we are responsible for. So even though somebody owns it, if I'm doing them a favor by storing, it's their stuff and it's just being kept on my property. But if my house burned down, God forbid, would I owe them money for what they're storing on my property? If the answer is yes, then I'm responsible for that property. I have some rights in it, some obligations in it, and therefore I have control of it, and I can't have that on my property during Passover if it's chametz. But if it's their stuff and they just happen to be storing it on my property, but if, God forbid, something happened to it, it's their loss, not mine, then that is okay because I'm not responsible for it, and therefore it's not considered to be with me. It might be on my property, but it's not mine, and I'm not responsible for it. Then that is considered removed from my possession, even removed from my sight, as it were. So we're getting to kind of like a little bit technical. What is possession for the purposes of chametz. But that's the basic principle. We have to remove everything that we're responsible for. And the final thing we'll mention is that there was an incident in Mechoza, which was a city in Bavel in Babylonia, where Rava was the rabbinic authority of the city. And what happened there were non-Jewish soldiers, like there was some, there was like a troop of soldiers, non-Jewish soldiers of the nation of Babylonia. It's actually Persia, who was in charge of this kingdom, as it were, in the land of Babylonia. And so there was some troop of Persian soldiers in Mechoza, and they were storing some of their stuff, right? They're a troop on the move. They don't have their own storage facilities. Maybe they're camping out in tents, but they want to store this stuff where it's going to be safe and maybe safe from rodents or whatever. So they were using some Jewish storehouses because a lot of the citizens of Mechoza were merchants. So they had storage facilities for storing, dry goods, and they were doing a favor to the the soldiers, right? But said Rava, well, you're doing them a favor, but you know perfectly well that because we want to maintain good relationships with the government and with these soldiers, that if for some reason their food that's in our storehouses got stolen or damaged or, destroyed, we would reimburse them so that they wouldn't get mad at us, right? So we wouldn't, so our safety would not be imperiled. Therefore, we are responsible for that flour or bread products, that chametz, and it can't be in our storehouses for Passover. So you're going to have to tell the soldiers, hey, we'd love to do you a favor, but we can't store your stuff on Passover. It has to leave, or presumably they could have made some arrangement where it was clear to the soldiers that the Jews wouldn't be responsible. But I think that was politically problematic, and so Rava just said, you can't store it. Tell them to find somewhere else to store that food. It's not possible for us during our holy day, our festival. And I guess the relationship with the government was good enough that they could probably say during our sacred week of Passover, we're not going to be able to store that chametz in our warehouses for you. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let me check comments or questions. Chaim Burke asks, how do I sponsor a class? So you make a donation to our nonprofit at donate.accidentaltalmudist.org. The suggested donation for sponsoring a class is $180. If that's not possible, give what you can. Really, for sponsoring a class, the minimum is $54. That's 3 times chai, 3 times 18. But remember, when you donate to our nonprofit, this is what you're enabling. You're enabling us to share Torah with the world. It costs money. We have staff, we have marketing, we have production costs, we have admin, etc. Just, we do this full time, and it's not easy. And there's a lot of stuff that we do, and more videos are coming, and podcasts, and all kinds of stuff. And just, running this organization costs money. It is a 501c3. It's tax deductible. So to sponsor a class and dedicate it to a loved one, to the memory of, to the honor of, to the healing of, that's a really beautiful thing to do, is to sponsor Torah learning because somebody needs a healing. So go to donate.accidentaltalmudist.org, and the link is in the comments. Lynn, I am grateful for so many things, one being the 327 days of Daf Yomi, cycle 14, with AT daily so far. And we are grateful that you're here, Lynn. And she continues, it has been a quiet shelter during the many challenges in 2020. Bless you, our dear Litvak family. That is so sweet, Lynn. Thank you. Thank you so much. The names that I read at the top of the show every time, I can't keep reading names the whole show. I mean, it'd just be too much. But I always, before I light the candle, I always read, the names who are able to tune in that quickly. And that's why we have that countdown timer at the beginning, so we could just get started. But, we know, right? We recognize each other. It's a bunch of people, Stephen and Deborah and Donna and Paula and Chaim and Yosef and Bill and John. I'm sorry if I didn't mean to omit you if I didn't. There's too many names for me to name right now. But the point is, we see these names every day, and also we go back and look later, and there's a bunch of people who don't watch it live, but they watch it that night right before they go to bed, or some watch it in the morning with their coffee. And we really are a family. It's like we're all in this Beis Midrash together, this house of study together, making this 7.5-year journey together. It is incredibly meaningful to Nina and to me, and to our community here in LA. With the guys that I daven with on Friday nights and Saturday mornings, I sort of report to them how it's going in our class. These are yeshivish guys who were blessed that they had this opportunity to learn Talmud with, gifted Talmud teachers, and they speak, Hebrew fluently, and they're very comfortable in Aramaic and with the jargon of the Talmud. But I didn't have that opportunity when I was growing up, and so many of you didn't have that opportunity. But here we are, learning together and really learning together. And I'm learning so much as I prepare these classes to teach you. And then when I share with them the ideas that we focus on and the way that we learn, that we don't just do the superficial, read everything, but rather go deep on concepts, I got to tell you, they're very impressed. People who have been lifelong learners of Talmud, they're like, how can you teach this stuff? It's way too complicated. Like, people with no background, how are they going to be able to follow it? And I said, oh, they follow it. They follow it. So that's why we don't do every concept on the page, but the ones we do, we try to take a deep dive while keeping it clear and accessible. And it's incredibly holy work. The fact that this class exists and the way that people are, latching onto it, and it's always growing, and you ask these great questions, it's spectacular. It's spectacular what we have together. So Yasher Koach to all of you who are here with us regularly. Really, may you be strengthened to keep learning all your lives to 120. Sharon says, this reminds me of the apparent conflict in the Torah when we say that God did all of creation in 6 days, and then immediately after, the Torah says on the seventh day, God completed all his work, removing leaven from our houses, right? So the way that we count the first day or the seventh day, think how often this is coming up for us. Counting, right? Counting days, when we count the Omer, right? When we get to Passover, from the second night of Passover, we're going to count 50 days until we reach Shavuos that celebrates the revelation in Mount Sinai. There's just other times in the year. Pretty soon, we're going to get to where we change our daily prayers when we bless the years from the summer blessing to the winter blessing, which happens either on December 4th or December 5th. The sages are precise. They're precise. And it's not because they love algebra, right? It's because we want to understand, the way that God made the world and the way that God distinguishes between day and night and between one month and another and between holy and not holy. Getting into those lines of demarcation, it's holy work. It really is holy work. Sometimes it's difficult. Often it's difficult, but it's very much holy work to understand and uncover these distinctions in God's world. Franny Schaefer says, what happens if a festival falls on Shabbos? So, for instance, Passover can fall on Shabbos. It certainly can. With respect to cooking, so then we cannot cook, right? We can cook on a festival, but when the festival falls on Shabbos, we got to do the cooking before. But it's Shabbos, so we're used to cooking before Shabbos for Shabbos. Where it really gets difficult is if the festival falls on Friday, right? Because then you can cook on the festival for the festival, but you can't cook on a festival for something that's after the festival, even if it's Shabbos. So that's when we make the Erev Tafshilin, where we sort of start cooking for Shabbos even before we start cooking for the festival, symbolically. And then, we handle it, right? So there's a way to handle it because at the end of the day, these are laws to live by, not to suffer by. But it's a great question, and it's one that the sages definitely addressed. And interestingly, there are certain rules in the calendar so that, what is it that Yom Kippur can fall on Shabbos, but I think it can't fall on Friday. Like there are certain days that Rosh Hashanah cannot fall on. Like 3 days of the week, they've arranged the calendar so that Rosh Hashanah can't be on that day. So there's sort of safeguards because then it would become just way too difficult to observe the holidays. And finally, Peter says, is it enough to just abandon the property since you don't want it back, right? In terms of the leaven. These days there's all kinds of arrangements that we make where we can't own it, but we don't want to just, throw it all away. Leaven can include a lot of things, all your boxes of cereal and, stored grain products, all kinds of stuff. And so now there's arrangements that are made where like you would take it out of your house, maybe store it in your garage, and then you or your rabbi makes a deal with a non-Jew where you actually sell your chametz to a non-Jew, right? He doesn't care if it gets destroyed, so you're not responsible for it. Like you would sell it to a non-Jew, but like for a nominal amount, like $1. And then like you don't want it in your kitchen, that's for sure, but you could store this kind of stuff in your garage. And then at the end of Passover, you have to buy it back from the person that you made that deal with. Those are the kinds of things we're going to get into later. But the important thing is that you can't be responsible for chametz, even if it happens to be on your property. And that's all we're going to have time for tonight. But we're going to be talking certainly more about the hours of the day. There's a question about the hours of the day. Neil is asking. That's quite complex. We're not going to get into it now. But when we talk about the third, fourth, fifth, sixth hour of the day, the hour in terms of the Jewish calendar is not always the same length. Basically, daylight is divided into 12 hours, but they're not 60-minute hours. They're as long as they need to be 1/12 of the daylight. But we'll get to that later in our journey. You should all have such a sweet, healthy, meaningful, joyful Thanksgiving. Tomorrow's Friday, so we'll be meeting to learn together at noon Pacific time, our regular Friday time. If you haven't had Thanksgiving dinner yet, you should enjoy it so much. I'm very much looking forward to eating with Nina and the kids right now. And if you've had it already and it's still Thanksgiving for you, you should just, enjoy it and give yourselves a pat on the back for learning on this national holiday of Thanksgiving. It's great that we got together to do some Torah learning. Have a great night.